Welcome to Light Camera Author, the podcast where storytelling meets the storytellers. I'm your host, Jim Juno, and today's episode is raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. I'm joined by filmmaker and author Lorna Tucker, whose new memoir is coming out in May. It's entitled Bear, B-A-R-E, and it's published by Brazen Publishing. And it's a stark, unflinching look at survival, addiction, homelessness, and ultimately transformation. It's not just a story, it's a confrontation with reality. And Lorna, welcome to Lights Camera Author.
Thank you for having me.
Now you're coming to us today from the UK, correct?
I am. So it's a sunny Sunday afternoon in London.
It's not one of those typically British days that our president talked about the other day.
There's nothing like a British person to moan when it's cold and moan when it's hot. But yes, very lucky.
Well, your memoir, Bear, is being described as groundbreaking, and I mean, on the back cover, you got some really who's who in blurbs, but we'll get to that in a second. But this centers on the experience of female homelessness. So let's start here. What made you decide that now was the time to tell your story?
I guess it's seeing, I travel a lot for work and film and kind of seeing this connected tissue everywhere that I go to, whether it's US, America, France, in Europe, of this homeless epidemic that's growing, and also the sort of demonization of youth, of gangs, of what, there seems to be such a lack of empathy of what leads children into these decisions, instead of seeing young boys in gangs as fatherless boys, living in poverty, trying to find a way out and dealing with that. That's sort of the heart of the problem. There seems to be this big mentality of like keep them away, put them in prison. And after lockdown, I saw the homelessness numbers rising in a very sort of visceral way around me. So I've been asked several times before if I'd write a book, and I've had offers that came in, and it never felt like the right time, or I was so worried that there would be such an emphasis on writing something, that was very poverty porn. There's been a lot of books. Oh, there's an alarm going off. Should I shut the door? Can you
I
hear that?
can't hear it. No.
Oh,
Mm-mm.
sorry. I'll go back a step. There have been many books about addiction before, but it always felt from a very masculine perspective, or it always felt very kind of like, here's the problem. I had a big problem, and now everything's great, and I'm this like really exceptional person who's really inspiring. And I really felt like that doesn't give hope to the reality of it, of that it's not that simple. And you don't, have a tough time and then life's okay. It's like it took me almost 20 years of failing and building everything up and then failing again, and really unable to kind of shift this devil on my shoulder, which left me feeling really worthless. And I would read books or watch films, and it was always like, well, this person, at the depths of their addiction and or homelessness or this dark time, and now they're just this wonderful human. Why is that not happening to me? Why can't I get my shit together? Why can't I
Yeah.
keep myself on the straight and narrow? And it really left me feeling lost, and that maybe, I would never ever come out of this. And maybe then that life wasn't worth living. And I guess it then boils down to why I wrote it, was because it's been a really tough journey and full of fun as well. It's not all dark and dreary,
Mhm.
but I really felt that, as the press found out about my past, when my first couple of films came out, it seemed to be the only thing that journalists wanted to talk about. And I got so grumpy that people wouldn't let it be, and they didn't want to talk about the artistry behind the films. But actually, every time press came out, I'd be inundated with letters to my agent, messages and of young people, like really young people between the ages of 15 and 30, saying that reading my story gave them almost a reason to live, that they were feeling like they were just about to check out because they couldn't keep it together and things weren't going well for them and they didn't clean themselves up. And then a job came and then everything was rosy. It just kept, they felt like the darkness kept on coming. And then they read interviews with me where they realized, oh, it's a long journey. And sometimes, everyone's journey is different, but that somebody could live a semi-normal life or find a place for themselves. Because a lot of what I talk about is, there's so much beauty in people who think differently or don't fit in. And generally, it's just about finding the thing that brings them joy and learning that and putting their whole self into that. And that gives them a sense of accomplishment, that gives them sort of happiness or somewhere to put the pain. But so many people don't have the opportunity to find that or go back to study or find a way out. So I think this time when I was asked if I'd be interested in writing a book or several, as it turned out, that I felt like it was the right time. But I really wanted to make sure I did it in a way that felt true to me as a storyteller. I learned to read and write very late in life. And it really, that was the thing that saved me because if I hadn't, I was nearly 30, I really don't believe I'd be here now. Like everything I write, whether it's a horror film or a thriller or a kids film, it's still me trying to process fear or things that I grapple with, but through other characters. And that's when my life really started to turn around. So I just felt that if I could write it as if it was a film where I could actually, not dwell on the and then this happened because, the
Mm-hmm.
book is like 2% of the things that actually happened. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, right, how can I make something that is just using several things that happened during this time and introduce you to these incredible humans that saved me or were part of my life. And also some of the examples of things that happen to young people when there isn't protection around or there are no boundaries or they don't have a support system, then maybe you can fall into this world with me and walk by my side and have an understanding, if you're someone that hasn't been through this, to have a bit more empathy for young people that are struggling or people of all ages. But for young people or anyone that's going through it, to get a sense that they're not the only one and they're not alone.
Yes, and one of the most striking elements of this book, and for those of you who haven't seen the cover of the book, I mean, I mean, no, I was going to say you really bear your bones on this because, you talk about, living on the London streets. I mean, being addicted to heroin. This is just on the cover. So I
Mhm.
guess one of the things I wanted to find out was what did you decide to include? How did you decide to include what you include and what might have been too painful?
Um, well, it was really interesting actually because, as someone that's new to language and writing, and I was told I'd never be a writer because I write as a stream of consciousness, and now I'm a commissioned script writer, so it kind of makes me chuckle. Again, it was that kind of like, oh, you've got to write minimum 80,000 words. Like, how does someone do that? And
Yeah.
next thing I know, I've got 400,000 words, and we're like, oh my God, what do we do with this? So there was a version that was kind of everything, and I was never going to show anyone that. And it was more to see how much I remembered. Because I've spent nearly 20 years in active addiction and there's a lot of stuff that even now still comes back to me that I've completely forgotten or chosen to forgotten, and it's always at the most strangest of times. It can be a perfume or a sound, but there was a lot that came out and it was like an outpouring of grief,
Mm.
and it was a really healthy thing to do actually because I'd never quite confronted any of it. And then it was like, okay, I always say, whether I'm writing a script or a book or whatever I'm doing, or even with documentary, it's like I'm a really terrible writer, but I'm a really good editor. So it was kind of like everything came out. And then it was like, oh my God, actually, no wonder I'd always
Mhm.
struggled to keep clean from drugs because it was kind of like, oh shit, like it was this, and then it was this, and
Yeah.
then it was this, and then it was this. And this kind of went on for like 400,000 pages. And I was like, but now let's try and go through it again and remember all the happy times. And that was like really beautiful because then, all the wonderful people that I met that also were like the lost boys of Peter Pan, the people that saw something in me and protected me, and also the fun that we had when it was fresh and we'd all found each other, like all these children that had been lost and broken, and you find each other and you just have this magical time, like this strange coming of age, like anything's possible and we love each other and in the most weirdest of places. And then it was like, oh, okay, this is where it actually has to be. So instead of it like, oh, it's the darkness, it's like, let's look at the beauty, but then let's bring in some of the darkness but at times to show like how not just children who are running away from abuse, not just people that have struggled to come out of the care system or the youth offenders institutes, but how people with serious mental illness, now that we've closed down so many of the psychiatric hospitals, and you have a similar problem in the States,
Hmm.
we don't have that struggle. They find each other, but then also a lot of people who have darkness that want to hurt people will gravitate towards those
Yes.
people too. But then it was kind of, let's just keep this beautiful for as long as possible to really emphasize how magical all these young people were, because none of them are around anymore. None of them survived it. And I know how lucky I am to
Yes.
have had survived it.
Yeah, the book Bear really it really challenges the way people think about homelessness, especially I don't think I've ever seen a book written about female homelessness before. If
No.
so, I don't remember it.
There has been one or two books, but it's very much like so guarded or so written for a viewer. And as like I said, what was so important is to show the feminine side. And it's the same with the films I make. We've just had I'm just filming the adaptation of the book Bear at the moment with
Hmm.
the posting to extraordinary cast, and it was the same. It was like, I want to show the magic. I want every time somebody walks past a 50, 60-year-old with no teeth, who's seriously unwell, who maybe smells, and you're getting angry that they're begging you. I want to rewind 20, 30 years so you can see who that person was before this came
Hmm.
over. I want you to see the magic of them just being a child that was let down, and just to see like to realize that everyone was someone's child once. Everyone was a young kid once with dreams that were silly sense of humor. They weren't always that way. I have a friend, Darren, who is still alive from when I was on the streets, who is still homeless, and he is not well because he's had this abuse from the public for so long and he's had no help and care. And when I see him and I visit him often, for me, I see where I would be had I not had an act of kindness, and that also where he would be, because he's also one of the most extraordinary writers that I've ever met in my life. Yet the longer you're in that situation, the more that happens to you, the 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 less likely it is that you will ever lead a normal life. So it's all trying to move towards an understanding of like, well, if we can put more focus on troubled children, children slipping through the nets, children that have mental health problems, then therefore you will end up with less of what you witness in the book, and it will save money in the long run for governments.
What do you think people most often misunderstand about addiction, especially relapse?
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing for me. It's the problem is, especially if you fell into addiction in a young pivotal time in youth, the formative years, the harder it is to ever go through struggles later in your life without relapsing. So, for example, I, had quite a lot of abuse, and the moment I was given drugs, it's never like, oh, take this. It's like after something really bad has happened, and
Yeah.
someone's like, this will take it all away. And it did. And it took me somewhere that I was so in another world that I was completely unaware of what was happening in the outside world. And then I'd come back into the real world and it hurt and it was painful. So I wanted to get back to that place where it didn't hurt. And then you're chasing that constantly. And when you're chasing that, days and weeks and months just disappear and blend into one. And again, going back to the film I'm making now, it's a very surreal version, but trying to show visually in cinema how that feels to lose a year, 2 years, 3 years of your life without even realizing that's how the length of time. But because I started using drugs very young, I never learned how to handle heartbreak. I never learned the neurological connections and pathways to kind of handle high stress situations, or what it feels like to have people be mean to you or bully you or lose your job. And so you don't have that strength and resilience around those kind of stress factors. So, and also having post-traumatic stress disorder, I can get out of one situation, but I could get a job in a cafe and I'm working in a cafe and I'm having flashbacks of sexual abuse or flashbacks of, you know, seeing friends die, or and everyone's giggling and having fun and talking about a group holiday they're going to go on that summer, and I can't connect with them no matter how much I try, because I've seen so much and so much has happened in my life that no matter how much I tried to fit in, I never quite could. I could never drink like normal people drunk. I could never take ecstasy and go raving. For me, it would just lose weeks of my life spiraling and taking things too far. And so for me, it's, the triggers would come, and I had not learned any way to kind of handle that or to step back and how to self sort of regulate. So when things like that would happen, I just found it so hard to not go back to taking something that took all those memories away or all the pain away or the feelings that I felt. And then the spiral would be again back into the cycle of like, well, I can't live like this with this terror like haunting me forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I spent up until nearly 30 in a cycle of trying to build up my life, finding a new friendship group, trying to be like everyone else, and them not understanding why I would be so secretive about my past, or why I didn't want them to meet any of my family or anyone that knew me for a long time in case they let slip, because I was so fearful that they wouldn't like me if they knew, or they might judge me if they knew. And and so many, like, so much hang-ups, and then somebody might click or somebody might meet something, or I would slip up on drugs and people would be like, why do you keep relapsing? Why are you a junkie? Like, this is ridiculous. You've got all this great stuff going. And they never, ever understood what it was bringing me to that. And then my self-worth would go down, and then I would feel suicidal, and I would go back into this cycle. And then I'd go back to rehab, and then I'd have to detox, and then I'd have to try and find a bar job again. And so my life was just this cycle of trying to rebuild my life and try and make new friends that didn't know me or wouldn't judge me. But then I could never sustain that for long. It's like treading water, in the sea.
Yeah.
It's like you can only do that for so long. And then that's why I think it was the scariest thing in the world when the press did find out about my past. But I think the most beautiful thing that came out of it was actually so many people from my past reached out to me and said, why didn't you just tell us? We would have completely understood so many of our problems we had with you, as we just couldn't understand why. We felt that there was such a big secret you were always hiding from us, and we couldn't, and we knew you were troubled, but you wouldn't talk and you wouldn't open up. And for me, it was just the shame. It was that utter shame of, like, everyone I knew would be going through problems with, that they had split with a boyfriend, or their friendship group was falling out, or people would always be whinging because they couldn't do this, or they wanted money, or they had, expectations of what they felt they deserved in life. And I was living in fear that videos might come out of me that would make,
Yeah.
would make everyone in the world think differently of me. And in addiction, I found myself taken advantage of so many times when I was really
Yeah.
young. But with people, but people would film it and take pictures, and instead of understanding that that's abuse and that's grooming and things like that, you kind of fall into a headspace feeling like that maybe you had brought it on yourself, even though you're 14 or 15 and you don't. So my headspace, I didn't have language. I hadn't had proper therapy. I
Yeah.
hadn't spoken to anyone. So I think, you know, again, I think that's what led me to write the book, is that I really wanted anyone that had been through anything and that they were ashamed or hiding or felt dirty or less than, that actually maybe I can teach you the language that we're not, and that's not how it is. And actually, you can rise from that and use that in something, in art, in music, in painting, in writing, and just the way that you handle situations in society. And that can be something I think that is so needed.
I was going to say, what do you think? What do you think should be done? What changes would you like to see
Oh God.
culturally or policy?
Well, I think we need to one of those scrolls out, don't we? Roll down the room.
Whole
I
bunch of text rolling by, right?
exactly. Well, I think we can start with what can society do? Because, it's a top down, bottom up, right? Us on the ground, what can we do? We can be a bit more empathetic. Obviously, we don't want to put ourselves in a dangerous situation, but we can be kind. We can say hello to someone. We can not ignore someone. We can, if we're worried about someone, ring social services or a helpline and say that we've seen someone that we're worried about. I think, secondly, it really is a top-down problem of governments putting more money into holistic mental health services. So there is a place for children that really do have serious mental health problems that's more therapeutic with the right medication, and they're looked after, not just kicked out and they're on the streets, with
Yeah.
schizophrenia. Um, I feel like when it comes to addiction services as well, there's so little understanding. I was invited to do
Excuse
a
me.
tour this summer, which I really want to do next year, but I couldn't because I'm filming this film at the moment, which is talking about youth homelessness and how we can treat that, but also treat youth addiction. And it kind of then goes across the board of like refunding rehabilitation centres to open up where it is a more holistic approach to it, where we're not just putting people from heroin onto methadone and then trying to deal with, like, it's like putting plasters on a problem. It's like, let's go
Yeah.
back and see where this arises. If we put more money into education and we have people with lived experience when it comes to grooming, surviving abuse, surviving addiction, surviving the prison system, that have moved on with their lives and done something great, there's the key to a change in society. If they do school tours and they talk to young kids will understand what grooming is. It's not just having an older boyfriend that's cool and getting into
Mhm.
trouble. They will understand that that's not okay. Kids that are worried that they're in a gang and they can't escape and things are getting heavy, if they can hear someone giving who's young and looks cool but is telling their experience of being groomed into gangs and how they manage to escape and move on with their life, it will stop kids getting into gangs or anyone that is slightly on the edge, how they can get out of it. If we reinvest in youth centres with youth workers who have lived experience in multiple different things, and there's free advertising, and you get really cool rappers to be on the posters, and there's a free phone number, and they're at every bus stop and every train station. When a kid runs away and they turn up at one of these places to escape and they see a poster like that, there's somewhere they can go to and speak to a young person that's pretty cool, that's been through it. It will stop them running further. It will stop them feeling like they can't talk about their problems. So I really feel it's like education wise, we need to get more people doing tours and speaking to schools and speaking to audiences, but we also need to reinvest in mental health services, reinvest in education, reinvest in rehabilitation centres, and also then and wraparound services for people that already have fallen on the streets. Like, if you find people that have been on the streets for 2, 3 days, you take them off, you give them somewhere safe to stay with a bursary grant to do some form of retraining and education with wraparound therapy. learning how to pay their bills, within a year or two, that person will be able to move on and be a taxpayer again. Whereas the longer you leave it, the harder it is for them ever to turn their life around. But, I did some work looking into the costs, and we would save billions each year if we invested in the preventative instead of like there's that saying, isn't there? You put a fence at the top of the cliff instead of an ambulance at the bottom. You put that
Yes.
fence at the top of the cliff with preventative, you're going to spend less money clearing things up, and then that money you save from clearing things up, you can put back into the education and all the health service that have been completely defunded.
Well, the author's name is Lorna Tucker, and I want to thank you, Lorna, for being here today, for your honesty and your courage and your storytelling. The book is Bear, Bare, and it's published by Brazen Publishing, and it comes out in the States on May 20th. So you can pre-order it now on Amazon. I mean, it may be available over in the UK right now. So but you can order it, pre-order it, go to Amazon, go to another one, but or go into your brick and mortar store. So Lorna, really thank you for being here today on Lights Camera Author.
Thank you very much for having
And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. Until next time, I'm Jim Juno, and keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening to the stories that matter.